1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 to 17 says this: Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. In this video, I'm going to be discussing food choices for our children. And so if you are a parent, then clearly this video is for you. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, why does it matter what I feed my child? My child is healthy, my child is okay, and, what we eat isn't everything. Well, some of that is true. It's not all about what we eat, it's about what we watch, it's about our mental state of health, etc. It's about exercise, but in this video, I'm going to be concentrating specifically on food because I feel like it's an area where a lot of parents tend to slip up, and myself included in the past. I've been guilty of this as well. And, the knowledge that God has imparted to me, the wisdom that He has imparted to me, I want to share for you guys, because I really feel it's something that needs to be addressed. We're seeing so much children, being obese, in this day and age. And, I really feel that it's quite sad, to see children struggling to move, to see children's eating habits. I see a lot of children on the streets drinking, diet Pepsis and colas and eating lots of chips and burgers and all this sort of stuff. And, parents, sticking their children in front of TV with a bowl full of crisps and popcorn and, a remote control in their hand, and it is very sad. And the excuses that, parents use to justify it is that, well, I'm busy and, I work a lot, or, I just don't have the time, or it's too expensive. And, we've got to stop feeding this excuse to ourselves, because the fact of the matter is obesity harms children and young children. It gives them high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, not to mention bone and joint problems and breathing difficulties. And it affects their emotional and behavioural, responses. It affects them emotionally, and it does affect their behaviour. And there's a lot of children I've noticed, over the past 20 years or so that have just, they're being diagnosed with all sorts of hyperactivity disorders, ADHD, and, they can't concentrate properly, and they've got anger issues. And, we know that this isn't all down to strictly just solely food. There's a lot of other factors as well. But because this topic is on food, I'm addressing the food element and how that contributes towards a child's well-being overall. Obesity harms our health. It gives children depression and anxiety and sleep problems. And I've noticed that there's so many children out there, especially the youths, that's suffering from depression and anxiety. Parents are bringing their children to the doctors even more than they ever did because their children's moods are erratic. And yet at the same time, they're feeding them or allowing their children to feed themselves on sweets and, high salt intake with crisps and, regular intake of junk food and processed foods, and then wondering why their child's moods are erratic, especially when they reach to their teenage years. And I really feel like, this is where parents need to take some responsibility and stop with the excuses. There's so much healthy options out there. There's so much ways that you could get your children involved in healthier eating, and it starts with you as the parent, because the responsibility is yours. You need to train up your children in the ways that they will grow, so that when they're old, they will not depart from it. And this is true of eating habits. If you're constantly feeding your child processed foods, if you're constantly making excuses for the way that you feed your children, then they, grow up with these eating habits. And these are the eating habits that they, ultimately end up growing with. And when they're older, they end up sticking to these bad eating patterns. And, it really doesn't do their health any good. So maybe we should stop asking as well why food is so expensive and start asking why processed food is so cheap. There's that saying, you are what you eat. And there's a lot of truth to that because, if we're going to say, that food is expensive, then, what price do you actually put on your children's health? What price do you put on your own health? Because, there at the same time, there are, I find that buying lots of fruit and vegetables and, maybe even, meal planning for the week, which is very positive, can actually be a money saver in the long run. Because what you're doing is, you're preparing your meals in advance. And, you find that you start to eat more healthily because you're forming a more healthier routine, and a more healthier eating plan as a whole, and, you transform the way you think. And I think a lot of it, is the way we think. Because if you can train your mind to think, I'm too busy, I don't have time for this, and it's too expensive for me to eat this way or to feed my family this way, then that's exactly what you're going to, portray. That's exactly what your actions are going to do. You're only ever going to think in that zone and feed yourself in that way. But if you start to change your mindset, if you start to think, well, I want to be in health, I want to be healthy, and I want my children to be in health also, then, you will start to, shop differently. You will start to feed yourself differently. You will start to, be more careful in, the way that you select food. It really does start with the way you think. It really does start with your what you tell yourself, and we really need to renew our minds when it comes to those things. Now, junk food affects the way that you think. An unhealthy diet, for example, it interferes with neurotransmitters in your brain. So that causes feelings of depression and anger. And then there's, high calorie foods, for example, can have a negative impact on your memory. And we know that sugary foods, they give you a hormone imbalance, and it affects your ability to concentrate. So all these things, they have an impact on the way our brains function and the way they operate. And, it's very important that we realize this, because these things are affecting the way children behave. It's affecting their thinking ability. So it really does matter, and parents fail to realize this. And so when their children, reach the teenage phase of their life, and their hormones start to go all over the place, and they wonder why their child is angry all the time and all this sort of stuff, the one thing that they fail to look at is what they are feeding their child. What does their diet look like? What is their diet actually doing to their brains and the way it functions? As parents, we really need to take responsibility for our actions. We need to take responsibility with the way that we feed ourselves and the way that we are teaching our children to, take care of their temples, because it does matter. It matters, to God also, and while this may be true that you can eat what you want, that's very true. You can eat what you want. However, not everything that you eat is wise. So, let's be wise here. Let's actually use wisdom instead of believing that we we should eat everything. Rather, we need to be, renewing our mind. The food industry, and I want you to take this in as a thought process, because the food industries make a lot of money out of people's ignorance, okay? And they put a lot of things, a lot of cancer and ill health causing chemicals in your food. And they know that these things cause illnesses in the body. Now, it's interesting that when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, one of the things that he was tempted with was with food. Jesus had been without food, and it tells us that he was very hungry in the book of Matthew. And Satan tried to tempt him with food. And so we know that Satan does tempt us in these areas to make the wrong choices. And we can overcome our harmful eating patterns with God. He cares about even the foods that we eat, and we can overcome bad eating habits, bad thought processes when it comes to food with the word of God, because the scripture shows us this. And Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says this: "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." You see, what I want to ask you is this: how are you renewing your mind when it comes to your choices in feeding your children and your family? Are you conforming to the pattern of this world by constantly eating junk food, by constantly living on takeouts, by constantly, trying to justify your actions with the fact that you're busy, the fact that you tell yourself that you convince yourself that you don't have any time, you're convincing yourself that, eating healthy is too expensive, it's too time consuming. All these things are excuses. And it is excuses that the devil will use to push and pump into your life so that you do not learn how to eat healthily and keep yourself in health and to take care of your temple and your children's temple. So I'm going to show you a quick video that breaks down the scientifics of eating well and how it affects your brains. And I pray that this video encourages you, and I pray that this video helps you, and I also pray that this video blesses you. And remember, Jesus is the light of this world. God bless you.
If you sucked all of the moisture out of your brain and broke it down to its constituent nutritional content, what would it look like? Most of the weight of your dehydrated brain would come from fats, also known as lipids. In the remaining brain matter, you would find proteins and amino acids, traces of micronutrients, and glucose. The brain is, of course, more than just the sum of its nutritional parts, but each component does have a distinct impact on functioning, development, mood, and energy. So that post-lunch apathy or late-night alertness you might be feeling, well, that could simply be the effects of food on your brain. Of the fats in your brain, the superstars are omegas 3 and 6. These essential fatty acids, which have been linked to preventing degenerative brain conditions, must come from our diets. So eating omega-rich foods like nuts, seeds, and fatty fish is crucial to the creation and maintenance of cell membranes. And while omegas are good fats for your brain, long-term consumption of other fats, like trans and saturated fats, may compromise brain health. Meanwhile, proteins and amino acids, the building block nutrients of growth and development, manipulate how we feel and behave. Amino acids contain the precursors to neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that carry signals between neurons, affecting things like mood, sleep, attentiveness, and weight. They're one of the reasons we might feel calm after eating a large plate of pasta, or more alert after a protein-rich meal. The complex combinations of compounds in food can stimulate brain cells to release mood-altering norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. But getting to your brain cells is tricky, and amino acids have to compete for limited access. A diet with a range of foods helps maintain a balanced combination of brain messengers and keeps your mood from getting skewed in one direction or the other. Like the other organs in our bodies, our brains also benefit from a steady supply of micronutrients. Antioxidants in fruits and vegetables strengthen the brain to fight off free radicals that destroy brain cells, enabling your brain to work well for a longer period of time. And without powerful micronutrients like the vitamins B6, B12, and folic acid, our brains would be susceptible to brain disease and mental decline. Trace amounts of the minerals iron, copper, zinc, and sodium are also fundamental to brain health and early cognitive development. In order for the brain to efficiently transform and synthesize these valuable nutrients, it needs fuel, and lots of it. While the human brain only makes up about 2% of our body weight, it uses up to 20% of our energy resources. Most of this energy comes from carbohydrates that our body digests into glucose or blood sugar. The frontal lobes are so sensitive to drops in glucose, in fact, that a change in mental function is one of the primary signals of nutrient deficiency. Assuming that we are getting glucose regularly, how does the specific type of carbohydrates we eat affect our brains? Carbs come in 3 forms: starch, sugar, and fiber. While on most nutrition labels, they are all lumped into one total carb count, the ratio of the sugar and fiber subgroups to the whole amount affect how the body and brain respond. A high glycemic food, like white bread, causes a rapid release of glucose into the blood, and then comes the dip. Blood sugar shoots down, and with it, our attention span and mood. On the other hand, oats, grains, and legumes have slower glucose release, enabling a steadier level of attentiveness. For sustained brain power, opting for a varied diet of nutrient-rich foods is critical. When it comes to what you bite, chew, and swallow, your choices have a direct and long-lasting effect on the most powerful organ in your body.
Says this: our God is awesome. He can move mountains. Keep me in the valley